thanks for staying with us on TVC News. Let's go back to the story surrounding Sudan and the developments there. I have an analyst joining me, global affairs analyst Mukhtar Dan-Iyan, to discuss these developments. Thanks for joining us. Well, it seems, yes, it seems to be a new day in Sudan. But what do you think a two-year transitional government will portend for the country with this military presence, where the Sudanese are saying, we don't want no military presence?
I don't think it's a new day. I think what the military has done is, in typical African military fashion, they have played musical chairs with those leading the country. The new head of state, Ahmed Ouf, was actually the man appointed as al-Bashir's vice president just in February. Prior to that, he was the person responsible for a lot of the atrocities being committed, or rather, he was operationally responsible for a lot of the atrocities committed by the al-Bashir government, including the systematic rape and pillage of Darfur. So he was brought in because he was perceived as a loyalist. He was brought in, and this is in February, because he was perceived as a loyalist and as a person who knows where all the bodies are buried and has a major stake in not revealing their locations. I think the military decided that the civilian populace in their uprisings or in the protests of the last few months were getting to a point where something drastic had to be done. So I think they got together and decided that in their collective best interest, al-Bashir has to step down.
And you just mentioned something very important there. The man who was taking over, the defense minister, Ahmed bin Auf, is under U.S. sanctions over Darfur. Yes. Do you think he'll be accepted by the global community, especially the U.S.?
That is hard to tell at this point in time. U.S. foreign policy toward Africa is very ambiguous. It's very hard to tell in what direction they'll move. I think if he makes certain concessions quickly, he probably will be, but that remains to be seen. I think the ace is actually with the African Union. Is the African Union going to accept him? If the African Union accepts him, that will pave the way for the UN, the US, and other international bodies to grant him recognition. So really the ball is in the African Union court.
Now, let's talk about the U.S. sanctions that actually led to the downturn in the economy, which was the initial reason for the protests. And then, of course, the people began to call for Omar al-Bashir's resignation. How effective, really, do you think sanctions are when the people are usually at the receiving end?
It depends on the type of sanctions. I mean, sanctions were effective against South Africa, as is very well known. What many people don't know is that sanctions against the Abacha regime were also effective in the sense that they are one of the reasons that the United States simply got tired of not taking action and took proactive action. So in Sudan's case, they have been effective, at least in the sense that the powers that be in that country decided that something needed to be done. And unfortunately, what they decided to do was removing al-Bashir. So they are effective to some extent. But sanctions without a clear-cut exit strategy don't necessarily work. And I think in the Sudanese case, that's what we have. We don't have a clearly defined exit strategy.
All right. Thank you very much, Mukhtar Dan-Iyan, Global Affairs Analyst.